Hi, everybody.
Hello. Welcome to Thanksgiving week, where I supposedly scheduled nothing, and yet my calendar is completely full. I don't know if anybody else feels like that.
So this was supposed to be like super chill week, and like, oh boy, has it been frazzled so far.
So far, so frazzled. Oh my gracious.
Uh
Um,
huh.
but I'm very grateful that it involves food and family for both of us at the end of this. So we
Hey,
know that
yes,
that
ma'am.
is not the case for some people in our listening audience, and some of our friends. So we hope if this is a holiday that you are celebrating, we hope that you found somebody to do something positive with. And if you're bored, and you'd like to learn more about the holiday, I'm using air quotes, of Thanksgiving, we have lots of content for you around Indigenous peoples. We've
So much content
declared this as Indigenous Peoples Awareness Week.
for Abby research, not for like we don't have the power to declare it for other people.
I feel like we should, though. Like, let's just declare it. We just declare it, and we are celebrating it
Hey,
internally.
okay, all right.
Um, I'm the grandiose vision person. So, hey Jay, hey Sasha, good to see you guys here.
Thanks for
Um,
joining us.
and replay crew, as always, let us know where you're coming in from, and if you're able to join us, we love it a lot. I don't think I have anything else to report. I do believe we may have talked Jay into joining us in December for the time where you're on the plane. So, pals, if you have questions about Captain America, hockey, raising Canadian children, or what it's like to be friends with me in real life, please, in offline life, submit them so that Jay and I can talk about all sorts of fun things.
Winter in Winnipeg. She has some thoughts and feelings on winter in Winnipeg.
She
I
does.
discovered yesterday.
What it's like to live in a set of a Hallmark Christmas movie. These are all things she's an expert on. So can't wait
Expert.
to she she tells us that she's in a good mood today, so it may happen. And
Yeah.
this is one of those times in which I joke that I know where you live, but I don't because borders and COVID. I haven't been to your house yet. So.
I don't know. We can't find you. You're safe
Can't find
for
you
now.
for now. For now. But anyway, in talks of the COVID, Jay did find out today that her Sproglets are going to get vaccinated this weekend. So that's really, really exciting, and we celebrate that as we celebrate science, and we celebrate the increasingly people getting safe. You know what else we celebrate? Our theme song. I think we celebrate our theme song.
We do. Ooh, little air drum in that time. Yeah.
That was exciting. As I'm
I know.
I'm still eating my lunch. It's been one of those days. So I may be surreptitiously eating during empathy exercises, but guys, we're all in it together. And if I don't eat, Dr. Aaron gets mad at me. So we're all.
Yeah. She feel free to eat while I am talking in the empathy exercises.
Speaking of, I think this first one, darling, I think this one's you. First up.
Shocker. Shock of all shocks. Aaron has something to say about life in Native American worlds. So we talk about this all the time. I'm the Indian country correspondent. I am also a beer lover, as is Dr. Kristen. We drink it. And we like to support local breweries. We do it all the time. And I was super excited to have these to add to our list. So our friends at Hop Culture, which is, I think, a Pittsburgh-based beer magazine. I don't know. I met them at the Pittsburgh Beer Festival many, many years ago. But this is a great article. I don't need to really tell you what's in it because it's a listicle, so it tells you. But it's 7 Native American breweries that we can support, not just during Native American Heritage Month, which is coming to a close at the end of November, but like all the time because they're breweries and they exist. So there's some really interesting beers on here. There's some great articles about rewriting the history of Native Americans and alcohol and addressing those stereotypes. and reclaiming craft beer for indigenous people. So y'all, if you like beer and discovering new beers, I have this list for you and you're welcome.
I would assume it's a Pittsburgh blog simply because these are y'all's colors. And like whenever I see black and gold, I just assume Pittsburgh is a part of it somehow.
It's either us or Ballycastle, Northern Ireland. So
yeah, really, those are the two options. So yeah, I am super excited to be able to find some of these. Of course, as is the case with a lot of local beers, some of these aren't going to be available in your area. But as we all begin and continue to travel again, put these on your map. We have Washington State, North Carolina, New Mexico, California, Oklahoma, and Washington. So
yeah, so we're adding this Skydance Brewing to our Oklahoma City visit, which will happen sometime
next year. We're just randomly deciding our next two extravaganzas, by the way, in terms of tourism, are New Orleans and Oklahoma City. So if you live in either one of those places and want to meet us in 3D, you just let us know.
And we will let you know when we're going there.
There's no good transition for this. I tried to think of one for a solid 3 minutes, and there's no good transition. So one of the pieces of the opioid crisis that we have not discussed heretofore on this channel is the drug fentanyl, which is the kind of third coming of OxyContin. We had Oxy, and then we had straight heroin, and now we have fentanyl. Which is, oh God, everything's terrible. So for the first time in like the history of the CDC keeping this data, the over 100,000 people died in 2020 from drug overdoses. This is largely driven by fentanyl, which became really a drug of the pandemic, because as supply chains of drugs weren't able to be gotten very easily, local suppliers on both sides of the American and Canadian border began to cut their supply line with fentanyl. Fentanyl is something nuts, like 9 times as addictive as heroin. It is
10. I think 10, literally,
10.
But 9 is very close. Yeah, it's like, crazy. And like heroin is what, like how many more times addictive than OxyContin? Like it's crazy.
Yeah, essentially, this is 750 times more addictive than Advil. Like, I mean, it's just like, and that doesn't feel like hyperbole. No. When I talk to addiction specialists, there are people who can get clean from heroin and Oxy, and they are very discouraged as people's ability to get clean over fentanyl because of how incredibly potent it is. It's not impossible, but the experts are discouraged in some ways. So fentanyl's a thing you're going to hear more about as we talk about the opioid crisis more and more on this channel. You're going to hear us talking about fentanyl more. This is a terrible milestone that we have reached. This is an atrocious milestone. And I am incredibly concerned that we'll be reaching more because the control over the fentanyl market is -%.
Yep.
So I am really, this is a good article though. CNN Health is one of the, just not for nothing, random, like non-addiction focused health outlets that does tend to cover addiction stuff and some of the ins and outs, and their health reporters are pretty good. So if you're looking for a place to start, CNN Health is not the worst. But there's lots of concerns. We have lots of concerns, and that doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. Mm-hmm. A concern that has been slightly abated has been that it sounds like Peng Shuai, the Chinese tennis star, may be actually safe. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, has spoken to her in a 30-minute Zoom call, I saw. But I would like to register my skepticism,
yeah.
Because I am not always trusting of the IOC. The IOC also wasn't calling for her safety at the same level that the World Tennis Association was. And I haven't seen any statement that the World Tennis Association is convinced that she is safe, or that any of her colleagues are.
Right. So, or that she's not going to face severe ramifications for her accusation of sexual assault and misconduct.
Yeah. So, it's... The general public certainly has not seen her. And when Naomi Osaka, I think, is really the person who sounded the alarm kind of loudest and first on Instagram. And then all the rest of tennis, like nation, was like, we need this. Where is she? And there's still a lot of questions. but there is a potential question mark that she is physically safe, which was a question mark for far too long. So and that transition was not terrible. Congratulations to me.
Well done, you.
I'm so good. I think this one you or is this one me?
C'est moi.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, this one is very, very good news, generally speaking. I mean, good and bad news because we're still convicting innocent Black men of murder way more often than we should. But it was good news to hear that the two of the three men convicted of assassinating Malcolm X were exonerated. Sadly, already after they served prison sentences. But, you know, at least their record is now cleaned. It was still irreparable harm caused over the last 56 years. And these two gentlemen, I'm getting them, hold on. Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam were both had alibis for the time and place of Malcolm X's assassination, and they had no physical evidence that they were involved. The third person who was convicted confessed to murdering Malcolm X. So, you know, not super great that they didn't have a whole lot of evidence on these guys and still convicted them. That was really heavily sarcastic if that didn't come across clearly. But it's, you know, good to see that their record is getting expunged and changed and that they are exonerated. Side note for the coverage from CNN, they also covered and shared in this block a study that we do know that Black men are 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted for like big crimes like murder than any other category. So we've still got a lot of work to do on that. We like to see the involvement of things like the Innocence Project and the creation of these nonprofit grassroots organizations that are fighting to get people exonerated for being wrongfully convicted. So we're delighted for those two men, one of whom sadly has already passed. But exoneration is better than no exoneration. Empathy exercise.
Late apologies are better than no apologies. As we move to Eddie Redmayne.
Transition fire towards
who
the
is
end.
Now saying that he made a mistake taking the role in The Danish Girl. And I know this is Dr. Erin, so I'll let her expand, but that transition was too good to leave on the table. So
No, you are the expert transition person, and I thank you for your service. Yeah, so if y'all remember, Eddie Redmayne gained a lot of recognition for his role in the film The Danish Girl, where he played a trans person in his 2015 film. Got a lot of acclaim for it for his acting prowess, but also got a lot of criticism because he is not himself a trans actor. And he recently had an interview in the Sunday Times where he said, upon reflection, I made that film with the best intentions, but I now think it was a mistake. And I think this was like, when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, this is like a tailor-made empathy exercise, right? Because when Kristen and I teach about empathy all the time and talk about it on podcasts, on our podcast, on other people's podcasts, whatever, we always say, like, you're going to screw up. We're imperfect people. We're all going to make mistakes. But we can grow and we can learn and we can listen to other people. And clearly that's what our friend Eddie Redmayne has done. And he's like, you know what? I made it with the best intentions. I thought it was an important story to tell. My bad. I won't do it again. And it was a mistake. We have all the time in the world for that, as opposed to, like, you know, suck it up, big lad. It's art. You know, I can play whoever I want. So very encouraged to see that. And thank you, Eddie, for gifting us with this empathy exercise.
Yeah. So the best thing about that for me, just personally, is that it opens more conversations. So, like, he thinks it's a really important story to tell, and I don't disagree. So next time, sign on as executive producer.
Right. Put your name behind it.
Put your name behind it. Put your weight behind it. Like Brad Pitt and Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah. Yeah. Put your money, put your leverage your privilege that way.
Yeah. You don't have to play the role. And
Yeah.
it's not everybody has to be Lin-Manuel Miranda where you do everything. Sometimes you can delegate.
Not everybody can be Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah.
Hardly any of us.
Delegation is allowed.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to the main topic now. And I have my arms up in my this is big position that I tend to get when Dr. Aaron and I are talking about heavy things, because today's a bit of a heavy one. Today is a bit of a big conversation. And we want to talk, I know the topic says we're going to talk about Taylor Swift, and obviously we're always open to talking about Taylor Swift. But we want to use the last 10 days of media madness around Taylor Swift to talk about this concept of parasocial relationships. So we'll get to Taylor Swift in a minute, but first we want to lay the groundwork of what a parasocial relationship really is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know you've done a lot more work on this, but I read a Refinery 29 article that has a definition that I wanted to share with everybody before we get started.
I know that you wrote academic papers on it, and you really have thought about it for a long time. But I read this one article, so allow me to explain. Is the most peak academic thing that we've done in a minute. And for friends on the podcast, she is laughing because she knows she's being ridiculous. But it also is actually a really good definition. So please continue.
It is. And it gives a little context to it as well. And then you can get into all of the social sciencey stuff and the work you've done on it. So as I co-opt your topic here, you will indulge me because you love me anyway.
That's entirely true.
So, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of parasocial relationships, but it goes all the way back to 1956, which is something new that I learned today. It was coined by Donald Horton and Richard Wohl, who sound like some white men if I ever heard of them, to describe the way that mass media users acted like they were in a typical social relationship with a media figure, such as feeling as though they were friends with a radio or TV character. And so they go on to explain that this type of one-sided relationship existed long before we had the invention of these medias. People felt deeply in relationship with political figures or other famous folks who might have been in print media, gods and spirits. But obviously the massive upscale in mass media has changed that. So much so that it is overwhelmingly common, they say, for people to describe any relationship on Twitter as paranormal. But
parasocial.
Parasocial.
I mean, it's both paranormal and parasocial sometimes, so it totally...
Well, I was thinking of the gods and spirits. Apparently that got into my head a little bit. But this article continues. The definition of a parasocial relationship is where a viewer or audience member becomes attached to and invested in a media character, be they real or fiction, who doesn't return the emotion. A sense of intimacy and closeness develops on one side, but the other party, in all likelihood, does not know the former exists. Now we're walking the line a little bit here because fandom and is different in a way. Like Taylor Swift knows her fans exist. She is in conversation. She is in relationship with them in terms of how much they flip and love all too well. So much so that she made it the top of this album. So we get into some murky waters there, but generally it's that you feel like you know someone who is on social media, be they famous or not, and they don't know you.
So to do really quick, the difference between fandom and parasocial relationships are that you can absolutely... No, let me back up even farther. Parasocial relationships are not in and of themselves bad. We actually have... we actually kind of all have parasocial relationships with each other sometimes.
Yeah.
Or with, there's lots of different levels of friendship. So the media person, I don't think always is necessary to the definition of parasocial. I think what we're really talking about is somebody who you are not in a mutual relationship with. It's a relationship of imbalance.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're talking about. The important bit with the media is that I want to really bring in that definition does not, is that the media persona of the media person is often manufactured.
Right. Yeah. And
And
that,
so
like, the
that's-
articles that we're going to have so many articles in the show notes, and they get into the weeds a lot with that. But yeah, it's socially constructed, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of how this goes. So first of all, yes, Jay, this is in the same category as Sherlock Holmes is the beginning of fan fiction, although it's not really, because like the Iliad and the Odyssey are fan fiction, but I digress. The first like published fan fiction that was encouraged, and that the first fandom was Sherlock. So around Sherlock Holmes, not the BBC show, the actual factual like thing back in the day. They were the first conventions of fans to have conversations. The first published fan fiction was of the Sherlock Holmes oeuvre. And very famously, Doyle hated Sherlock fandom for a long time. He got really cranky about it. And he was not great, but spoiler, like almost very few creators were. Anne Rice famously sued people who wrote fan fiction, like crying out loud. Can you pump the brakes? Doyle was a bit of a crank with it. So fandom is a community. It is a group. It is, you can be a fan of a human or an idea or a whole lot of things, but fandom is the activity of being a fan of that thing, and you are usually part of a group that does that. So very famously, I am part of Marvel fandom. I'm very active in Marvel fandom, and I am I produce content around transformative works, which is often a part of fandom these days. In particular, really, since the Star Trek is what gave us like the modern idea of fandom with conventions and a lot of other things like that. But there's Supernatural is like a whole different ball game, all that kind of other stuff.
So much.
So you are in a parasocial relationship if you are in fandom, but they are still kind of separate entities. I am also in fandom with people I don't have parasocial relationships with.
Right.
Jay and I are both in Marvel fandom, and we are in actual relationships, but in a parasocial relationship with Tony Stark. So that's kind of the difference, is that fandom allows for mutual relationships, whereas parasocial doesn't. So Sasha brought up stalkers, and we're going to get to that in a minute. The parasocial relationships can be good / innocuous. So the innocuous ones are like a lot of people that really like different football players, or like you grew up liking Derek Jeter. I grew up, really having a crush on Jonathan Taylor Thomas. Teenage girls are queens of parasocial relationships.
Oh, I was in such a parasocial relationship with JTT. Whoo!
Yeah, we are
all
that
the
age.
Teen beats. I had
Devin, Sawa, a la the end of Casper.
And Now and Then. He was also in Now and Then.
He was Now and Then, but the end of Casper was my thing. I don't know if it's because, like, that was just my
that was
Devin
a
Sawa
sexual
awakening.
Yeah, for sure.
So all of those are all parasocial relationships. They are innocuous, kind of, or possibly even positive. You have the people, especially in Supernatural fandom, where Misha, I always want to say Misha Collins. That's not who that is. But the actor who is one of the main actors, has started this entire international scavenger hunt about being a good person. That is like done because he is in relationship with his fans, not individual fans, but like the fan as a group. Parasocial relationships can raise tons of money.
Yeah.
The parasocial relationship with Marvel that I am in over the last couple of years, this one organization, we've raised over $100,000 for charities. Shout out to Marvel Trumps Hate, which I am incredibly proud to be a part of. The Supernatural fandom did a fundraiser. Doctor Who fandom did as well on Tumblr. They did fundraisers after the Haitian earthquake in 2010 and like rebuilt houses.
Yeah.
So there can be really, really great side effects to parasocial relationships. You do feel a sense of community, not only with other people, but potentially you feel seen by the star. There's lots of people who will tell you that, a song or a movie or a character, people kind of imprint on Sebastian Stan a lot for this, that like knowing that he struggles with anxiety really gets them through the fact that they struggle with anxiety. So that's innocuous to potentially positive. Now let's get into, as we move down, we get into bad and ugly.
Yeah.
Bad is definitely we're crossing into the stalker territory. Obviously, that's not. Speaking of Sebastian Stan, he's had to move apartments in New York something like 12 times because people keep finding his address and making it public. So that is that's not great.
I'd say that's the ugly.
That's the ugly, yeah.
I think
the bad and ugly is kind of more fluid in my mind.
Yeah, for me, what I wrote down for when I jotted a few notes. Bad for me is this idea of a sense of entitlement or ownership that people have over the person they are in a parasocial relationship with. So that's where you get like,
and that's where you get like gossip sites like Dumois and Perez Hilton and
and like DMs that you didn't like my tweet, or like I added you and you didn't, interact, or like people feel that they are owed a certain level of engagement, and when they don't get it, then they are upset about it.
Oh yeah, there was I went to go see Hiddleston and Charlie Cox on Broadway a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And I stood outside for stage door because that's a sanctioned way to get autographs that I completely participate in, and I often enjoy stage door. And they said, "Oh, nobody, they're not coming out today. They're too tired or whatever." And these people around me started pitching fits like they were owed the autographs. I was like, pump the brakes. You paid for their labor on stage. You don't pay for their personhood.
You paid for that ticket.
Yeah, their obligation to you is done once the curtain goes down.
Yeah, so like, and then that's where I think like the bad part of that ownership then goes into like actual harassment of these people.
Yeah.
By paparazzi, by stalkers, and like the real ugly where people like,
Yeah, I mean like Jodie Foster, like the guy who shot Reagan because he was in love with Jodie Foster.
Right.
Which does not encompass people with mental health crises who imprint onto things. All that squeaking, by the way, is in Dr. Aaron's house. So.
Oh yeah, sorry if you can hear that. I'm having plumbers doing work, and they were literally like quiet for like the entire hour before this, and now they're like wrapping things up. So apologies to those listening wherever you are listening. But we have a couple questions and comments. We have one from Sasha. Sci-fi and fantasy have long been breaking barriers and have been a haven for those who are outside the norm 100%. And so you can see very intense fandoms within them. A real sense of ownership as well. We've got a lot of conversations within sci-fi and fantasy about, where the trajectory of, oh my God, that's really loud. I'm going to mute myself. Sorry.
That's okay. I'll pick it up.
Yeah.
So this is also where you get into massive fights over what is canon and what is not, who gets to say what this property is and who doesn't. That kind of thing is, to me, the ugly side of both parasocial relationships and fandom. And I think anybody who has been in any fandom for a long time can tell you some real horror stories about whatever fandom they're in. There's a great woman on YouTube named Sarah Z who does fandom history videos, and we'll link to her in the show notes if you would like to know about the Onceler fandom. That is an hour of your life well spent. And like, getting in a pair. Yes, from like the Lorax.
From the Lorax?
Yes. Yep. Yep. Welcome to Tumblr. So it's well, Tumblr
I'm such an infant when it comes to like social media platforms. Dr. Kristen is like always telling me things, and I'm like, really?
And I've gotten to teach her that if the answer to the question, does somebody really ship that character? Yes, the answer is always yes. Somebody ships.
Yeah. Speaking of ship, we've got a question from our friend Sasha. Have you seen the harassment of actors on the show 911 have gotten because the relationship hasn't happened? Yeah. I have not seen this, but I am not at all surprised. But yeah, that's that negative sense of ownership as well. Like, and people got so mad at parts of Marvel, like in the last Avengers arc when ships didn't happen and like, or things.
And a lot of that, the ships not happening. So in the early aughts, when there was a lot of really anti-ugly stuff around people doing queer shipping of characters, like if you were somebody, they're called /ships because that's how it's paired on internet fandom forums. So it got really, really ugly. You know, Spock and Kirk is a very famous one. Draco and Harry is a famous one. And you'd get like really like her ugly harassment. Now you tend to get harassment if you ship hetero folks a little bit more. And that particular Sasha, unless I'm reading the thing wrong, you can correct me. That is that the show has kind of queer baited a couple to men, and it is not happening. And people are very angry and are harassing the actors. I think that might be what you're talking about. I know that happened with Falcon and Winter Soldier. Anthony Mackie made a comment that he was okay, that Sam and Bucky were not gay because he wanted to show heterosexual men that had emotional relationships, and people came for Mackie and tried to cancel him. So it's a different dynamic than I remember it when I was a fandom baby. But it's the same energy of you have to tell the story I want you to tell. And my response to that is,
go ahead. Sorry.
My response to that is always, that is why fan fiction exists. Enjoy Archive of Our Own.
Yeah. And it just reminded me of when we covered Bridgerton, and like there's a huge like historical romance fandom and fanfic as well, and people were real salty about the alleged queer baiting that was happening in Bridgerton. And I just remember Kristen and I were like, y'all, she wrote the books. They're all hetero romances. Like, they might change them, they might not, but like, you want to write a story where Benedict Bridgerton is queer, write it. You want to see that story, write it.
Be the change you want to see in the world, folks. I hated the way that the canon ended in Marvel so much that I rewrote the whole thing. No joke. 135,000 word rewrite of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in which there is more smooching. So, because I was deeply upset with the lack of smooching in the MCU.
Always want more smooching.
Always want more smooching. So yes, be the change you want to see in the world, pals. So all told, parasocial relationships in fandom do overlap. But where I think the fandom gets toxic and parasocial gets toxic both ways is when you mix in this entitlement. And so as we're talking about the last couple weeks, we'll talk about both. I'll bring up Adele really briefly because I want to touch on this. And then our main topic is Taylor because of people's reaction to the Jake Gyllenhaal of it all. But one of the ways that we see the parasocial relationship with Adele, for instance, is how her body is public fodder in a way that very few other people's is. And she has been made to answer to both fat activists and health coaches and everybody about why she looks the way that she looks now. And I want to say it's in Vogue. I think it's in Vogue. I'll find it and share it at some point, whether on this video or another video. It'll definitely be in our in living Google Doc on wellness culture. But she talked about the fact that her transformation was only possible because she had money and privilege, and people did not like that. And so people who are in a parasocial relationship with Adele make a lot of, or anybody I should say, make a lot of assumptions about that person's motivations. So Adele gets less assumptions though than someone like Chris Evans, who people believe he is Steve Rogers, and ascribe Steve Rogers' motivations to Chris Evans, the person. And so like, that's why his the dick pic when he accidentally or on purpose, depending on who you talk to, slipped the dick pic a couple, like right before the election. People were utterly scandalized because Captain America would never do that. Well, spoiler alert, pals, friends and neighbors.
Fictional character.
Chris Evans is a boyo from Boston. He is not a guy from the 1930s in Brooklyn. So there's some differences. But we do this especially with actors who are very well known for certain characters. We have a parasocial relationship with the character and the actor, and we pretend they are the same thing.
Yeah. So
Taylor Swift has been playing the character of Taylor Swift for a very long time.
Yeah.
And with the last, since getting her masters back from Scooter, well, since re-recording her masters and the Scooter Braun gate, she has reclaimed the narrative of who Taylor Swift is. She has written herself back into the narrative, and she has reclaimed who she is. And again, this is providing us with a lot of discussion about this character of Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
I think the last 10, 12 days has shown us all the four phases of parasocial. And so we want to discuss now the well, I want to bring up the trauma thing, and I want to bring up the what do I want to else do I want to bring up the trauma thing, and then we can talk about the ugly shit. Do you want me to do that really quick first?
You can do whatever.
Okay. So the only thing I'll say is that about trauma is that one of the kind of crazy things that is happening in the internet right now regarding the song All Too Well, which is a 10-minute song about a breakup that happened after a 3-month relationship. Those are the facts. And there's some backlash about like that she was overreacting, or she's being too much of a child, or, you know, it was only 3 months, get over it. First of all, I'd like to remind everyone she wrote it when she was 22.
Oh, wait.
Sasha, we will summarize in 2 ticks.
Okay.
Because the and the other is that trauma is trauma. Trauma is trauma. It does not matter if you think that writing a 10-minute song after a 3-month relationship is silly. It matters that it meant to her. So the Taylor Swift thing is that, are you quiet? Do you want to summarize?
I have no idea, but I can try and I will summarize. I will summarize real quick. So yes, Sasha, the thing that's happening with Taylor Swift right now, she, prior to a year or so ago, did not own any of the music that she wrote and created. So, and she's had this whole legal battle to try and get it back. She can't really get back the rights, so she's re-recording everything and calling it Taylor's version and re-releasing all of her past stuff. So what happened last week on the 12th of November was she re-released the album Red, which a lot of the songs, including the fan favorite, it was never released as a single. It was never made into a video, but it became a huge fan favorite because I think we can all identify with the lyrics of it, All Too Well, which is believed to be specifically about her 3-month-long relationship with Jake Gyllenhaal that took place in 2010. So that's the backstory of it. And then on this new version she released, on the Taylor's version of Red, she released the same version effectively of All Too Well, and then a 10-minute version, which she talked about as being the original version that she wrote as 22-year-old heartbroken Taylor. I would have written a 10-minute song if I was as talented as her as well. So that got released. She directed a film starring Dylan O'Brien and Sadie, I'm not going to remember her last name, from Stranger Things. And she's done like a special version with the guys from The National. Like, it's been a whole thing. It's taken over. And I think it's like the first 10-minute song, or one of the first 10-minute songs.
It's overtaken Bohemian Rhapsody as the longest song to reach #1 on Spotify.
Yeah, and it's like to be at the top, like to be a 10-minute song at the top of the like charts for as long as it has. She's broken all kinds of records. So that's the like too long didn't read about why we're talking about Taylor Swift, because then what it did was this re-releasing of All Too Well brought back all of the possible think pieces about her relationship with Jake Gyllenhaal, who Jake Gyllenhaal is as a person, whether it's okay to be in a relationship with that much of an age gap, and whether it's okay to be upset about a 3-month relationship that happened 10 years ago. There we go.
And people are now sending like death threats and hate mail to John Mayer, who's one of her other exes, and to Jake himself.
Yeah.
Although I will say one of the big mythos pieces of this is that she left her scarf at Maggie Gyllenhaal's house. This is like part of the lore.
Yeah, and then it's in the lyric of the
It's in the
song,
lyrics.
Yeah.
And was photographed wearing it, visiting Maggie Gyllenhaal's house. And then Jake was photographed like after they broke up wearing the scarf. And so the scarf's a really big deal. And so there was a couple funny ones that were like, Buddy, just mail the damn scarf back.
Oh my gosh.
Buddy, just mail the scarf.
Dionne Warwick on Twitter was like, I will pay for the postage. Like, box it up. I will pay for the postage. Give the girl her scarf back.
Yeah. So there was a couple, like, sometimes Twitter is for jokes.
Yeah.
They were pretty good.
Yeah.
But you should die because you made a girl cry energy, that Taylor's fans kind of carry with them. The other thing that I've heard from other people who are culture critics, I heard this on the Popcast with Jamie and Knox, is that Taylor's fans have a reputation for being so rabid that you cannot critique her at all.
Right.
So there are songs on that album that are not her best. There are songs that she released from the vault, which like she wrote at 22 and wasn't released on the original version of Red, but is now being released. That aren't great, but they're fun, and we have them, and who cares, and all of this kind of stuff. But like you as a culture critic try to say like, hey, this isn't her strongest work, and Taylor's fans threaten you death.
Yeah.
Because they take it as an attack upon them as well.
Yeah. So there's that element of it where people are like, critics are critiquing
doing their job.
Red, Taylor's version. And you know, critiquing the music. We've talked a lot about critiquing the person of Taylor Swift on our YouTube channel, and if you haven't watched Miss Americana, please go watch it. And that gets a lot into more of the similarities between how we treated her and how we treated Britney Spears in terms of how we treat young women in these prominent positions and talk about them as if we own their bodies. We judge their romantic relationships. So a lot of the Taylor backlash is because we collectively, societally, were super judgy of her 3-month relationship with Jake. There was a 9-year age gap. There was a big age gap with her and John Mayer. And
her and Tom Hiddleston.
Oh yeah, her and Hiddles. I forgot about that one. But like, it's always, the judgment is always on her for being in the relationship, not on these men for being in the relationship with a 19-year-old or a 22-year-old or whatever. So that's a lot of what gets muddled into this. And so then I think that also adds to the parasocial aspect of people being really defensive of Taylor. People feel like we feel a very strong protective, like, inclination towards Taylor Swift. We joke that people should like watch if they come for Taylor Swift, but we don't actually like DM John Mayer death threats. So we draw a line. We joke about it a lot. But I think that's the thing that is what, like, we've had this topic, parasocial relationships, on our list of possible GDD topics for like a good year.
Because I could talk about parasocial relationships conservatively for the next 7 years. I am utterly fascinated with them. I love researching them and digging into them and thinking about them and watching. I love how we treat people's bodies versus people's personalities versus people's brains. And those are 3 different parasocial levels. And I'm a giant nerd for this crap. Yeah. And Dr. Aaron humors me frequently, but we had to find the right hook to where it wasn't just me waffling at all of you about this thing I find fascinating.
But we thought, like, hey, this is in the news a lot. Let's talk about Taylor Swift. But yeah, I think, you know, what's really been interesting to me is that a lot of the negative judgment around All Too Well has been that, like, why can't she get over it? You know, they think pieces about why do people have emotional reactions to short relationships and all this kind of stuff. And at one point I just remember like saying this, I think, to my mom, but I was just like just because Taylor re-released the song doesn't mean she's like sticking it to Jake Gyllenhaal. Also, if you hear her talk about this song was not necessarily her favorite, but it's a massive fan favorite. And she was like, I listen to my fans. They want music videos for things I didn't do music videos for. So there's this element to it as well, where we're prescribing all of these emotions in the song to her. And I've heard her talk about this, and a lot of other people, most recently just Ed Sheeran, talking about it, saying like his new album is very personal. He wrote a lot of those songs and they're very personal to him. And he's like, but as soon as I release it, it's not mine anymore. It's yours. But we still, because people like Taylor write such personal lyrics, I think that's part of the parasocial relationship, is we still put all of those emotions onto her or onto Ed Sheeran or onto whatever, or onto Chris Evans, that they they haven't said that they are still feeling.
And all of these things are frozen, and
Yeah.
they as humans evolve, and we as humans evolve. And with Taylor Swift in particular, a lot of the kind of angina around her is that many of us grew up with her.
Yeah.
And we were listening to these songs at specific developmental ages, which is why like boy bands are very specific emotions, because you are, you know, usually listening to them at very developmental ages, BTS notwithstanding, who seem to have a like ageless, you know, thing. But yeah, I mean, I have a weird emotional attachment to NSYNC, and I cannot tell you why, other than that's who I listened to a lot in my senior year of high school.
Yeah.
So I could not actually pick the members of Semisonic out in a lineup, but I can sing half that album off the top of my head. So
I love that album.
So we also use art created by others to form ourselves in these developmental years. And so it becomes another element of this parasocial. And I was reading at one point that teachers are a great example of kind of a mini parasocial relationship, because yes, they are aware their students exist, but they may not remember them 5 years from now. And I can still tell you like everything one of my favorite teachers ever said to me. And I know she doesn't remember me. So there's it's the element too, where like there are times where I'll say, Aaron, you told me once, and she'll look at me, I don't remember that at all. And it was this like really deep emotional moment for me, because like it hit me, and she's like, yeah, I don't remember that. So but that's humans. Parents will tell you that all the time. So
for sure.
It's one of the reasons that we always tell our parent friends, like, you're gonna screw your kid up. It's okay. Doesn't mean you're a bad parent, just means you're a human. And take a deep breath and make sure they have health insurance to pay for their therapy. It'll be fine. Because you can't control what you randomly say on a Tuesday that they don't even remember saying, that shaped your entire understanding of how love works when you're 4. Like they can't control that. They can't. So there's lots of unequal relationships in our lives. And the problem with parasocial is, especially now, is again, I want to draw it back to one of the major problems with parasocial is that these are constructed personalities. That social media gives a feeling of intimacy that is not authentic. And that there are people who make money off of the feeding of the parasocial relationships. So those are kind of the 3 things I want to draw your attention to. Perez Hilton is one of the most famous, and he now evidently regrets everything he did to Britney, which I'm glad, but cool. Dumois is the really famous Instagram account right now, and Lainey Gossip are the other 2. And the one that I'll just say, I hate Dumois, and let me tell you why. Because they accept tips about any celebrity from anywhere. You can get like essentially doxxed on your vacation, like not your address or whatever, but like if somebody sends in a picture with you, they'll share it on their Instagram, which has like 20 million followers or something nuts. But the people behind Dumois absolutely refuse to give their names or come forward. And like the level of hypocrisy does my nut. I just can't. Lainey Gossip currently, by the way, right now is completely convinced that Selena Gomez and Chris Evans are dating based on the fact that she wore a sweater that looks like one that he wore in Knives Out. Shit you not, this is the level of straws we are grasping at. So the issue is that these people make money off of this thing, so they have to keep feeding the parasocials.
Yeah, and also we know from some recent revelations from our friends at Facebook, and as we study more the nature of algorithms and how they work and how they push news items or, you know, gossip or whatever, they know that people are more likely to click on things that are exaggerated, that are negative, that are scandalous, and they make money off the clicks. So they're going to keep promoting this Selena Gomez and Chris Evans nonsense because people go, what? Selena Gomez and Chris? Click? That can't be real. So that's a huge part of this the negative elements of parasocials as well, is the way the algorithms literally are written to keep promoting the craziest stories.
So all in all, And first of all, let's say if they are dating and they are happy together, we wish them all the best. But constructing a relationship based on a sweater is a little tenuous, and we need to calm
And
down.
like a meeting, but they're actors. Like they met somewhere and there were pictures of them like having lunch. It was like, but they're actors, or they could be friends, or like whatever.
They could hate each other. Like we don't know.
None of your business.
None of your business. If you need to like get this kind of insider info, let me give you the list of romances that I read of like fake celebrities that it scratches that itch. Scratches that itch.
We have a lovely sarcastic question from Sasha. Don't we have important things to pay attention to? Then conjure up a relationship based on clothing. I mean, we do, yes, but I mean, as social scientists, like this stuff is important to people.
It's how we make our meaning in the world.
Yeah.
And it sounds trite, but the important thing, a little bit of why we're talking about this too, is once you see it, we're not even necessarily, again, parasocial relationships can be value neutral. They can be morally neutral, but they can get really negative. And so it's one of those like, hey, just pay attention. Know that this is happening. If you could not give money to Us Weekly anymore, I think it would be a great idea. But if you want to, if that brings you joy, like rock on. I went through a phase where I bought Heat magazine in the UK every single week because I thought it was hilarious. And then I got to know some other things about the planet. Was like, can't support this anymore. My personal choice. So how you find joy is important. And we have been gossiping about strangers since we've had language. So it's a hard thing to say stop completely. It's a hard thing to do all those kind of things. So again, just like everything, it's messy, keep it in balance, wobble with this, kind of understand. But I absolutely know that Chris Evans' dog's name is Dodger, and that he got him while he was filming the movie Gifted, and that he loves Dodger potentially more than the rest of his family, because those are things he has told me on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Am I upset that I know those things? No, because Dodger's really freaking cute.
So cute.
Do I spend my time conjuring up ideas of who he should be dating? I do not. That there are people who evidently do, which is where we get the problem.
Yeah, and I think the final thing I would end with, just going off of what you said and to Sasha's point as well, right? Like, as long as our general motto is, first do no harm, then do you. Like, as long as you're not harming yourself or others, and this is like, that falls into that realm, right? Like, are we harming people by buying Us Weekly and perpetuating the paparazzi culture? And it's like, we can make the argument that we are.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the same as stalking someone that you think you have a relationship with because you saw them post on social media? It's not the same. We can't compare them. But like, that's our general thing. Like, there's a lot of parasocial relationships that, as you said, are value neutral, aren't harming people. So like, all right, that's your jam. Do it.
But as always, first do no harm, and then do you. And investigate that on a regular basis. If we ever do Good Doctors merch, I think it would be first do no harm, then do you. And then
different people are different.
Different people are different. And then are we live yet? That might be our third.
We learn by doing.
We learn by doing. Well, we're going to hit pause in the conversation here. Obviously, if you have more questions, whether in the podcast crew or the replay crew, we would love to answer those and continue this conversation. Please give me more excuses to talk about parasocial relationships and figure that out. Next week, we are going to be coming to you with a discussion about toxic work cultures through the lens of the Blizzard Activision fracas, kerfuffle, rigmarole, shit show. Pick a thing.
I wrote scandal down, but
it's a mess. Really, too long didn't read for that one. There's been a persistent sexism, accusations of sexism and actual sexual assault at Blizzard Activision, one of the world's largest video game production companies, for several years. And it got so bad that the state of California sued them for a toxic work environment. Y'all, do you know how bad you have to be to get a state to sue you? So we're going to be having that conversation next Tuesday. In full disclosure as well, my husband once worked for Activision. And so this is I have some slight, not really insider info. He got fired in 2010, but he has told me constantly throughout this scandal that nothing he's hearing surprises him. So we're going to be talking about that next Tuesday. If you've got questions in advance of that, you guys know how to get a hold of us as well. In the meantime, our deep hope for you is that your most meaningful relationships are equal, and that there is equity within them, that you feel seen and heard by people who know you, and in fact love you, value you, and respect you. And we also, if we have not made friends with you yet and we are one of your parasocials, please comment, because we'd love to move that relationship to a more equitable one. Let us know how where you're from, how you are, how you found us, all that kind of stuff. We'd love to know that deeply. And we'll see you next week for a truly joyful conversation about terrible men.
I mean, who can top a benediction from Dr. Kristen? That's why she ends with them. So all the things that she just said, and goodbye for me.
See you all next week.